Hey everybody, welcome to Sister Talk. I am Lydia. This is
Hi, I'm Lorna. How you guys doing today?
and we are just gonna get ahead and start off our little quarantine podcast. That is my wonderful 4-year-old son who wants to be a part of our podcast, but he cannot. He's under 18, so conversations under 18 are not allowed. So, how have you been holding up this quarantine, sis?
I've been doing amazingly well. I have a chance to be around family, so that's cool. I mean, I was sitting at home alone, just sitting on my couch there, and I said to myself one week, I said, "Girl, this thing is gonna last a long time, so maybe you should get in your car and finally go see your family." So that's what I did. I took a 14-hour drive down to Kentucky.
Well, up to Kentucky. She's from Texas, for a lot of people that don't know. So she graced us with her presence. Thank you so much. And she's helping out. We appreciate her with everything that's going on. We have older parents, so we just want to make sure that they're good. And she's doing a really good job as far as taking care of them. As you know, this quarantine is hitting everybody hard. So is this something else? Oh, okay. So we're just, trying to do our best to adjust and evolve and work on bonding as sisters. One of the things that we did last weekend, we had a movie night, a girls' night, and we had the opportunity to watch the Clark Sisters. So how did you feel about that movie?
I thought it was a good movie, talking about people growing up in the church and music. We did grow up in church. I didn't really pay attention all the time, but we did grow up in the church, and we also grew up singing in a local choir. I wasn't the best singer. This is a singer over here, so she was all for the rehearsals, needless to say. But it was great watching, the experience, the dynamics between the sisters, the dynamics between the sisters and the mom, and just the dynamic with relationships in general, whether it was between the mother and the father, between the sisters or the mother and the daughters, and their relationship, and expectations, whether it's expectations from your parents, whether it's expectations from your siblings. Somebody always has some sort of expectation. And even with us, our father was the one that had the most expectations. My mom was, if you want to jump off of a building, honey, I'll support you. Well, not literally jump off a building, figurative speech.
No, I know you mean figurative speech, but there was like a tone that resonated in the movie, as far as everybody having their own opportunity to branch out and do the things that they want to do. I think a lot of times, especially growing up in the household that we grew up, it was kind of strict. Our father was the person that didn't like Bell House or whatever, and just we went to church almost every day. Felt like I got sick of church. So I think growing up we had this bond with our parents, and I'm going to speak for myself, where I never wanted to disappoint my parents. I always wanted to have them be proud of me and do the things in life that I thought, that would make them happy. But, a lot of the things in our life, and the same thing that happened in the movie, is just finding what works for you, finding that balance to make yourself happy, finding situations that will be better for yourself, and I think as you grow, you have the understanding that, your the value of yourself matters a lot more than what somebody else holds or has or expects of you. And that was a lot that happened in that movie as well. Growing up in church, we, there were a lot of similarities, that discipline was there, where we're always in church, while we were always traveling. So I definitely, could relate to a lot of things that were going on. And I remember during the movie where I was hoping that, that song came on, Blessed and Highly Favored. That was like one of my favorite songs, because during a specific time in my life, I was going through it, and that song really helped me in a lot of ways. And so I kept telling my sister during the movie, I'm like, I hope they play my song, but they're not going to play it. I hope they're going to play my song. And then they played it at the end. That was it for me. Yeah.
A total breakthrough, I would say. Total breakthrough moment. But the one thing that I brought to Lydia today was that, when I saw her today, I came in her house and, she had ideas and topics that she wanted to talk about. And I had ideas and topics that I wanted to talk about. And one of my topics was, loosely based off of one of the things that she wanted to talk about. But then I told her, I was like, well, we watched the Clark sisters last week, and I kind of wanted to be open and transparent about the dynamic between her and I. I mean, we may come to tears. I'm feeling emotional right now. But I will just say, I know, but I'm the crybaby now. I used to not be the crybaby. I used to be the tough one. But I wrote down like a couple of things that I just wanted to just kind of
you wrote it down on the receipt?
Girl, that's all I had. You didn't have a paper.
I did not know that.
So, just to launch into the topic of being siblings. Sometimes when you have siblings, people think there's these expectations that because you have a bloodline that you're always going to be close and everything's going to be peachy cream or whatever. But in our relationship, we've had some downs and we've had some highs. And it's the irony of it is that off camera, we've never really been able to sit through a full conversation and just divulge like how we feel, and how we have felt. And the one thing Lydia said on her way out the house, it was a little undertone. She was like, well, I hope you're prepared, And so my thing is that I am prepared, but I also know that for me, this is another phase of like healing for me, because sometimes in life you have to do some searching within yourself, and sometimes that searching within yourself, you realize kind of what you always known about yourself. Maybe you were, I like to call people a piece of shit. So, I would say, times in my life that I was a piece of shit. And the one thing that I wanted to start off with was just like the beginning. So, of course, I am the oldest. And the beginning, I was very selfish. I didn't like to share. And I had reasons as to why I was selfish and why I didn't like to share. I had 2 older brothers, and they never treated me different. So it's weird to be like, oh, well, I treated her different, when her and my little brother came along. But the reality of it was that when my brother came, I realized that it didn't really bother me because he wasn't in the same room as me. We're not sharing anything in like the same dwelling. He was in the room with the boys. And then for me, it was like my parents had a baby. I don't really think there was really any communication, or maybe I didn't understand, that my mom was pregnant because I was so young and I really didn't even know what that really even meant. So, I was selfish, and along with being selfish is like, you have to share a room that's a baby in there, the baby's crying. It's like, well, how come the parents can't, watch this child? They're the ones that brought the kid here. Until at that age, I didn't know where babies came from. I really didn't know. I just knew that when I came on the scene, it was these 2 boys that I gravitated towards, and that's all I knew because that was the beginning of me. Another thing talking about like being selfish, is that my selfishness, and I realized, I had this thought about females. And my thought about females is that I never really bonded well with females because in the beginning, when I was born, my mom was paralyzed. So we didn't have a mother-daughter type bond. And for years, we didn't have that type of bond. Like I was very rebellious, very mean, very self-centered. I would say I was just a raggedy piece of shit, and that's just the truth of the matter. I had a lot of emotions that I didn't know how to communicate those emotions, and those emotions stem from, being in a situation where abuse was prevalent, whether it was my brothers and I fighting, whether it was seeing, adults misbehaving, if you will. I really won't delve into too much of that because it's not that it's so much personal. I am being transparent, but for the sake and safety of others, I just kind of want to leave that portion out. But my brothers and I, we used to fight all the time and wrestle. So for you, that becomes innately who you are. That's what you like to do, because that's what you've seen, you've participated in it, you become accustomed to those things. So in being in an environment where you're accustomed to those type of things, The downfall is that sometimes you don't know how to separate those things. And when I say you don't know how to separate those things, where with my brothers, it was something that it was okay. Well, with my sister, it was something that was not okay, and we didn't have a bond. And so our first interaction, even with her being in the world, wasn't pleasant for her because I was used to abuse, and I was used to not anybody like abusing me like that in that aspect, but as far as like abuse, like I would say you don't realize that you become a product of your environment until later on down the line. And so another thing that I would also like to say is just also, having hate at an early age, with not being able to explain why you have hate or why you feel the way that you ultimately feel. I did a podcast earlier this week, and it was talking about, how you deal with a traumatic experience. And for me, even before I had trauma in my life, I already was, I didn't behave properly. I found myself like having to fight for myself in various instances where it was with teachers that were labeling me, and I didn't know what labeling was, but I knew that I was a target, meaning that I got put into a reading group. Now I know I didn't need to be in a reading group because I knew personally that I had amazing comprehension and I could read. And so I started to become combative because I was put someplace where I didn't want to be. And when you're 6 years old, you don't know how to speak up for yourself, so to say. You haven't really become acclimated to words of self-expression to an adult that's not your parent. And so with that, I had very deviant behavior. I wasn't like a perfect child, and I just wasn't perfect. And I went through my life being not very good. And so with that, my behavior pushed off on my sister because, I was disruptive to her being, disruptive to the fact that, I fought her, I would say, for a period of my life. I could say, like, I didn't have, like, love for her, nor not even just for her, but for my parents and for my other siblings as well. And I was given love. My parents, they loved me. And I know that they did. But I felt like most of my time wasn't really spent with my parents. My time was spent with my siblings, was spent with, my brothers and my sister, and that's where our time was at. I'm not saying that our parents were not involved, because they were involved, but when you have 5 children, you become friends with your siblings, or like those are the people that you gravitate towards or what have you. And so, I just wasn't kind. And then also having to realize that when you are a child yourself and you've always have a mind frame of that you're an adult. And so for a long time, I always felt like I was an adult. I always felt like I was just too mature. I was, ahead of the curve, if you will, just, in my actions and the way I thought, my thought process. And so you become a bossy person, and you have a personality that's just like you can do whatever you want to do. And it's like you don't realize the effect that it has on another person, because this is just who you've been. Your parents may have had to have conversations to try to correct that behavior, but you can't correct behavior when that person is comfortable in who they are, and then you don't think the shit stinks, basically, in a nutshell. And so with that, there were times when, I didn't realize that, well, maybe I did realize, there were times where I did realize that she was my younger sister, but I never allowed her to be on like the same playing field as like my older brothers, where we treated each other as if, we were equal. And I didn't do that with her because I was just so bossy. And I just had my own personality. And then my sister, she was very quiet. And she did it. I don't want to say she didn't have a voice, but, well, yeah. It was if she didn't really have a voice. And it's kind of like somebody that they're quiet for so long, and then it's like something in their spirit, like it erupts because they've gone through this bullshit with you, and it's like they're finally finding their voice, so to say. So one thing I think about is like in the movie Dreamgirls with Dina. You know, when Dina was going through everything that she was going through with, I can't remember Jamie Foxx's character in that movie, but just, you know, you don't have a voice, and you know, people, you know, it could be your family, it could be your siblings that, you know, seem to like take your voice, and you haven't really found who you are. And I will say that when my sister began to find who she was, we did, you know, we butt heads a lot, because, you know, she was finding herself, and I wasn't respecting the person that she was, and wasn't giving her the opportunity to necessarily be the person that God called her and designed for her to be, just because, you know, once again, I'll use the phrase again, one's a raggedy piece of shit. You know, it is what it is. The truth is the truth, and that's the truth. I know she's probably bursting over here at the seams.
Girl, I am. So I would have to say, like, my sister is the first person in my life that's ever hurt me, to where, you know, it lasted for years and years and years. And I never understood why. I still don't understand why. You know, it was always that mean spirit that I would see, you know, in her, that she showed towards me. And I never understood the abuse. I never understood the verbal abuse. I never understood, you know, that when it came to the verbal abuse and the manipulation that brought across, how that affected me in my life. How if somebody gave me a compliment and I'd be like, oh, well, this ain't nothing, you know, not being able to accept a compliment or accept the fact that somebody sees something differently in me that's positive versus what I've always, you know, experienced or what I always felt, you know, in my life. And it didn't hit me till probably like a year or two ago, until I finally like had to think about where did this come from? Where did these insecurities come from? How did they start? You know, and so I was always prepared to be like picked apart. Like, girl, what's going on with this? Your hair, your clothes, your this, your that. So I always had a thing, you know, of where it started of not feeling good enough, not feeling like I'm worthy or whatever. And I didn't understand that she had played a major role in my insecurities until, like I said, a year ago, because I never could pinpoint where that came from. Going
just
around
really quickly.
No, I didn't interrupt you.
No, I know you didn't interrupt.
Yeah, but let me finish, because
okay.
I didn't interrupt you. So, like, you know, going around in school, you know, in certain situations, I didn't expect anybody to think anything of me, because that's just what it was. So, like, when it came to, like, a lot of the issues that I had as a child, there was always that inner anger with me. There was always that inner rage where I used to have homicidal ideations about my sister, because it was just a lot of built up anger. So I am a tick boomer, you know, and I did have to come to a point with my sister, you know, to be like, I'm not that little girl anymore. I'm not that little girl. You know, I'm a grown woman. You know, I'm not that kid anymore. So don't put me in that box. And I think, you know, what she was speaking on, you know, she hit it on the head. You know, except me, you know, as a grown ass woman, you know, I'm not that same little girl you used to be. That I'm not that same little girl, you know, that was manipulated by you into, you know, making me think that I'm not this, that, and the third, that I'm nothing. So, you know, I think, you know, there was a lot that happened, you know, even, you know, in recent years. There was things that happened where comments were made, and, you know, they're hurtful. I feel that she's remorseful of those comments, but in the same sense, it's still hurtful. You know what I'm saying? It's that pain, just it hasn't gone away. So, you know, growing up how we grew up, yeah, my brothers were, we were all rough. We got 3 brothers. So, you know, there's a difference between, you know, playing rough and wrestling with your brothers. I play rough and wrestle with my brothers, but the mean spiritedness that she had, that was different. Because when I'm wrestling with my brothers and I, you know, they had like 2 black eyes, like we playing, we just rough. But there's a difference between, you know, there's that anger behind it. There's that hate behind it, you know. That's different, you know. So I think, you know, this is definitely going to be something that's ongoing, because, you know, my sister and I are both alpha females. You know, it's just like, you know, I think we're always going to have a situation where we butt heads. That's because of our personalities. And I just think that's what it is. And for the most part, I'll leave it at that.
What I will say is, actually speaking about insecurities, I actually did a podcast earlier this week, and I was talking about insecurities. And with those insecurities that she's probably referring to is, I grew up getting roasted, okay? We would sit and we would roast each other. It would be, hey, you're fat, you stink, you're ugly, you're black, you're this, you're that. Not just meaning just with her, but as the siblings as a whole. And one thing that I talked about in my podcast the other day about insecurities is that I think I was prepared for the world and things that the world says to me. And meaning like, in my podcast, I mentioned like how, my brothers were like, oh, like you're fat, you're ugly, or, you bald headed, you this, that, and the third. But for me, I felt like those things, they were funny to me. And I felt like in life, I've been prepared for those things, meaning like, I don't have perfect skin. The same thing I talked about in my podcast earlier this week, is about the insecurities and the insecurities that you allow people to put on you, and you push those things out to the forefront. And sometimes those insecurities that you put on people, they look in the mirror and they see, well, as she mentioned, like, well, I'm not good enough. I feel this and I feel that. And I would say when I was, 17, about to turn 18, there was somebody that told me, oh, you're beautiful. And I'd be like, what? I'm cute. I was like, oh, you're lying. I'm like, because my brothers be like, oh, you're ugly as fuck. So I'd be like, like, how is this person like, oh, I'm beautiful? When I've always just put my brothers in the realm of like, they're truth tellers. They tell the truth. And hell, if my brothers say I'm ugly, then that's what I am. I'm just fucking ugly. And, that moment for me, it was just like, well, damn. Maybe that just was a part of my brother's roast session, because I would say, I've never had a problem of, meeting a man or a man meeting me, should I say, or, sparking someone's fancy or sparking someone's interest. But those insecurities, sometimes they do stay with you. I'm not going to say like I don't have any insecurities, but I try not to let a lot of those insecurities just like weigh me down like on a day-to-day basis and make me feel like crap every day. Every day I do have to get up and I do look in the mirror, and I'm not always happy, or satisfied with the blemishes that I see. So of course I do try to do things to try to alleviate those issues. But sometimes we do put insecurities on other people, and those are just maybe insecurities that we have within ourselves that we're spewing out to someone else. And one thing that I had told Lydia when I moved to Texas, I started hanging around, my family, and they were just like annoying me. And I would call her and I'd tell her, man, I understand why, I was just really getting on your nerves, because, I had a cousin that'd be like, oh my gosh, like you're always doing something different with your hair. Like this, and it was annoying. And I had like a moment, I was just like, I called my sister, I was like, damn, like, I see what you're talking about. That shit it's annoying. And like, it drove me crazy, because I remember one time with my relative that I'm referring to, it was like one of her friends, they were like, I don't remember what hairstyle I had that day. And she was just like, oh, like I like your hair, it looks really nice. My cousin's like, well, that's a weave. And I was like, damn, bitch, like, let me get the compliment. You know what I mean? And so it's like, you don't realize or don't really have that feeling, because I didn't go through life like that. I didn't go through life outside of the door of people being like, oh, you're ugly, oh, you're fat, oh, your skin is this, oh, you're that. I didn't deal with that like going to school. I didn't deal with that like, in my life. And I've had kids call me like, oh, you got bad skin or whatever. Like, yeah. And a child, let me tell you something. A child would give it to that ass, okay, and make you feel some kind of way. Because one of my little cousins, when I tell you that little kid gave it to me, she told me I was fat. And I was like, oh, God. But I had already been thinking those thoughts about myself, because I was looking down at my stomach and it just was looking very plush and puff. So, yeah, those insecurities, they can tear you apart. But the one thing I was also saying the other day was just like, you can't allow those things to define who you are, or allow those things to get the best of you, or allow those mean things to weigh you down. Sometimes you have to take those things and you have to say, bitch, I'm the shit. Like, fuck what
Yeah.
this bitch just said.
I definitely think there's a
Hold on,
period
I
that
didn't interrupt you.
I don't give a shit.
I'm just messing with you.
But because this is a good segue, I feel like, you know, when you go through stuff, you know, you go through that period of self-love. In spite of this, I am this. So in spite of my weight, in spite of my bumps, in spite of my fading hair follicles, you know, I'm still a beautiful person in and out. I'm still a determined person. You know, I think you just have to breathe life into yourself when everything just seems like you don't have anything left. You can look in the mirror and say, oh, okay, you know, I'm fat, but I'm cute. You can't tell me shit. I don't care, you know. I might have this little stupid ass thing over this raggedy camisole, but I'm still cute. Can't nobody in the world tell me. Can't tell me different. So it's just like you have to find things about yourself. I'm determined. You know, I've never been a lazy person. I've been knocked down so many times, but I bet you I'll get up and I rebuild. You know, so you have to get into a period where you speak life into yourself. And I think that for the most part, you know, speaking life into yourself is something that is very important before you start dealing with somebody else, because when everything is just unresolved in your life and you're adding someone into your life while you have unresolved issues in yourself, you know, a lot of times it affects the relationship. And I think that, you know, as you get older, when people say it's very cliche, you have to work on yourself, it's very true, because if my finances ain't right, if my weight ain't right, if my health ain't right, all of this stuff is going to come into the relationship that you have, you know, with the next person. Oh, I want to get married. Oh, I want to have another child. But a lot of times when I think about, you know, dating, because my sister and I, we're single.
I'm not single.
Girl, you single. My sister and I, we are single.
I have a man, honey. I've got a man in Jesus. Glory.
I thought you had a man in Casper.
Him too. I got two babies by Casper.
Yeah.
Casper Nisha and
But
Casper Jr.
I always think about, like, you know, I definitely, you know, I'm somebody's wife, period. You know, but in the same sense, I have to ask myself, are you ready for that person right now? Absolutely not. So the thing that I encourage myself to do is just, girl, work on whatever it is that you want out of life, because I am at that point in my life where I'm not willing to give up any part of myself for somebody else right now. There are a lot of things that I want to do with my life. You know, there are a lot of things that I want for me and my son, you know, so I don't want somebody else that I have to consider in order to accomplish anything or in order to achieve my goals. So I think that that's something that's very important, you know, before you start putting yourself back out there after a breakup, or, you know, you just have to really take that time and get yourself together. Just like my sister's gonna have to get herself together and find out who Casper is.
Well, that is true. But then also with getting to know yourself, I recently went to therapy. And I would say, some people be like, oh, well, you don't need a therapist in your business. You don't need a therapist for this, that, and the third. But I will say that therapy, it helps you and allows you the opportunity to break down walls within yourself, you know, be transparent and basically do the work. And when I talk about doing the work, like I mentioned this in one of my other podcasts, was that, you know, my therapist, day one, you know, my conversation with her was that, listen, like, I had just been in 2 car accidents, literally within the same week. And I was on steroids, and the steroids that I was on, like, I started to like get like really heavy. I mean, like, I'm already like, my BMI is already over, but I started to get really heavy. And, you know, at the time I was dating someone, and they were like, you know, that your stomach is like, it's getting really big. And I used to be like, you don't have a 6-pack yourself. And so my first day of therapy, because I didn't really know how to get the message over to him, that I didn't want him to keep on, you know, talking about my weight. I had therapy with my therapist for the first time, like over the phone. And on the phone, I put the phone on speaker. And so I addressed to her that, you know, it was becoming uncomfortable about someone talking about my weight, because, you know, I was getting bigger because the steroids, I mean, I was gaining like a lot of weight because, you know, I had a partial lung collapse from being in an accident. And on top of that, like I have issues with my body from just being in like other accidents where like, my body and stuff locks up. So not only just having those issues, but gaining a lot of weight and, still not able to put the fork down also, but she told me to tell the person, like, I'm going through something. So either you're going to deal with it or, you need to just hit the door. And so, he listened to my therapist. So he was allowed to, sit in on my therapy session and get some understanding from it. And then literally after the therapy session, he said, you know what, I promise to you, like, I'll never say that to you again. And I can say that he never said that again. So I do appreciate that. And another thing that the therapist talked about was, having gratitude. And gratitude not for like anything else, but having gratitude for yourself. So every day, write down something that you're thankful for about yourself. And so, if I was happy about my eyes, I would like wrote down in my, my notebook, like, I'm thankful, that I have beautiful eyes. I'm thankful that, I love myself. I'm thankful that, I have on a nice top today. So it doesn't matter what the gratitude is that you have for yourself, but sometimes you just have to not only just say it to yourself, but write it down on paper, because I would say a good portion of therapy is learning to release. And sometimes you may not have somebody to talk to. You may not have a therapist to talk to. That paper can be your piece of release. It helps you release, content from your mind, and it allows you to create. And one thing I'm sure Lydia can attest to is that, being able to write and create, she writes a lot of songs and thoughts, and I write thoughts. I write some songs, but she's a better songwriter than I, and a really good arranger. So you have to take those things and not allow those things to make you who you are. And if you have raggedy piece of shits of people in your life, just realize that, they're going through things themselves, and maybe they don't know or realize that they're raggedy piece of shits, and you just have to arrive at that, and you have to figure that out. Yeah, that's pretty much.
I don't think you have to be accepting of raggedy piece of shits.
No.
I think you have to, if you're gonna deal with somebody that's going through something, you can, I think you hold the control of when you deal with toxic behavior, because if it's something to where it's just not going to work out, you got to let that go. If it's just not going to work out, I encourage everybody to just let it go, let that person go, especially if there's no real ties or whatever. You just gotta let it go. You gotta think it's healthy to pick and choose the times when you even want to deal with that person, because it's just like, yeah, you're going through something, but so am I, and I'm not in the space to deal with what you're going through. So, okay, let's disconnect. We can reconnect at another time, and I think you can either choose that option, when it's a situation to where you want that person to be in your life. And I think that there's the different situation when you just don't want to fuck with that person, period. So I think, you have to be mindful. You don't have to keep every toxic person in your life. You got to let them go. Regardless if they're going through something or not. It's not my problem. It's yours. That's why you got to figure it out and not me.
I do agree with that, but I will say there are times when, I've been toxic, and I've been around people that were toxic, and I was that person. I just like to communicate. I like to communicate, and sometimes wanting to communicate, it's probably not always, I can't say communication is not always a good thing, because I've always just liked to communicate, and just like, whether we're screaming and shouting or whether we're talking, like, we have some sense. But in dealing with myself being toxic at times and dealing with other people that are toxic at times, I think for me, once again, when I talk about, with females, it's easier for me to like abandon them, if you will, because I don't know, like, ladies are just like super emotional, and sometimes it's just easier to connect with a guy, because I guess I don't know, it's just a little bit easier. And because I'm not like, I'm emotional now that I'm older, but I don't know, ladies sometimes can just be like too emotional. So the toxicity of people that I've dealt with mostly were guys, not really ladies, because my friends can attest that I don't really I don't really open up to them as much. And I was telling Lydia that like years and years ago, you know, of being careful of your friends. Not saying that I told her be careful of your friends because, you know, you can't give people all your information because when you give and you give, it's like people use those as swords and they use those as weapons. And so, I mean, I had one experience with that and I literally just like after that, I've shut it down. And that's probably been like 12 plus years that I've shut that down. So I don't really open up to females just because, you know, it's that sword, if you will. And I don't need them all in my business. I don't really need a lot of people in my business because I don't really try to delve into a lot of other people's business. I am nosy though, but I'm not going to ask you 1,000,001 questions because at the end of the day, sometimes I really just don't care. And I know it's a little bit off topic, but I would say for the most part, like this has been really great dialogue, and surprisingly, we didn't. No, surprisingly, there's been no tears. Not surprising about the dialogue, but you know, no tears. And I do feel like this is. I feel like maybe there's more that you probably want to let out. No? Oh, okay.
I mean, you understand what I'm saying. So I don't think that there's anything for me to elaborate further. You get it. You pick up on what I'm saying. I don't have to. You know, I don't have to go in great detail for you to pick up on what I'm saying. So whatever I said that was geared towards you, you know it's towards you. So it's just like it's whatever. But thank you everybody for joining our podcast. Join us next time whenever that is. She's gonna be having to go back to Texas. So thanks.